Well, hey. Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I hope everybody is ready for an absolutely incredible day. I'm very excited because, as we've been doing, we fortunately have another one of our Weaver alumni who are also a graduating Los Alamitos High School senior. Today we have Orion Moore leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then following that, continuing with our one school, one book, Song for a Whale, we have our own McAuliffe principal, Dr. Ryan Weiss-Wright, who will be reading chapters 21 and 22. So go out there, go have an absolutely incredible day, and just know I'm super proud of you. Take care, everybody.
Good morning, my name is Orion Moore, and I'm a Los Alamitos graduating senior and a Weaver alumni. In the fall, I'll be attending UC Santa Cruz. A favorite memory of my time at Weaver is the outdoor science camp. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remove all hats and hoods and place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Thank you.
Chapter 21. What if I could get there somehow? If I showed up at the sanctuary when it was time for the expedition, they'd see I was serious, that I wasn't just some kid doing a project. Even if I couldn't get on the boat, I'd be at the sanctuary when they tagged Blue 55. I'd see him swimming in the bay while the song played. A 12-year-old could fly alone. If I left in the morning on a school day, my family wouldn't notice I was missing until after I'd landed. But the closest airport was almost a 3-hour drive from the sanctuary. I studied the map on the computer screen. An airline ticket would let me cover almost all the distance between 55 and me. The hard part was the last 150 miles. If only I could grab onto 55's song and let it carry me to him. I was afraid one day soon I wouldn't feel his music anymore. I didn't know how it would all work out yet, but I had to try to get him. I'd go as far as I could and then take a shuttle or a bus to get as close to the sanctuary as possible. Maybe I'd get caught by then. I wouldn't be hard for my parents to figure out where I was headed, but I couldn't give up on Blue 55. Buying a plane ticket was a whole different issue. My radio repair money wouldn't take me very far. Even if I had enough, I'd have to buy the ticket with a credit card. I leaned back in my chair and glanced up at my shelves of radios, then sat on the floor next to my bed. An idea was creeping into my head that I didn't like but couldn't push away. I brought up 55's song on my phone, feeling the vibrations on my hand as it played. Hadn't I made him a promise? With the edge of my shirt, I polished my fingerprints off the side of the Philco. My email to Mr. Gunner was short, but it felt like it took me an hour to click send. I'd always said I'll never sell my radios, except in case of an emergency. I posted a few of the radios on eBay as 2-day auctions so the money would get into my account faster. The next day, after school, I hurried home to pick up the Philco. I wrapped it in an old bed sheet so it wouldn't get scratched, and maybe so I wouldn't have to look at it. Tristan said he'd take me to the antique shop. When he saw me in my room next to the sheet-wrapped radio, he asked, "Isn't that?" "Yeah," I signed before he could finish. "Mr. Gunner really wants to buy it. I don't mind letting it go." I looked away so he wouldn't see how much the lie hurt, but at the same time it was true. Letting go of the radios would let me reach for something I loved even more. "Can you carry it for me? I'll wait in the truck." I slipped past him and ran downstairs. Mr. Gunner looked so happy when we walked through the door, he must have been worried I wouldn't show up. I couldn't really believe it myself. When I was older, I'd look for a Philco to buy again, maybe from a kid like me who had a really good reason to sell it, an emergency. I peeled away the sheet and held the sides of the cabinet one last time, probably for a little too long, because Mr. Gunner looked at me and raised his eyebrows like he was asking a question. I let go. He knelt down and checked out the radio on all sides. His face showed me he was impressed. He plugged it in and turned it on, then smiled as he listened to the music. Mr. Gunner's open hand circled his face, then closed. Beautiful. He thanked me and reached for his checkbook. "Thank you," I signed to him before I left. I hurried out of the store ahead of Tristan, trying to outrun the thought that I could still change my mind. "Wow, you really did it," Tristan signed when he got back into the truck. "Can you take me to the bank?" We pulled into one of the drive-through lanes, and Tristan put a deposit slip and the check into a plastic tube for me. I ran my finger around the face of the compass and looked out the window, pretending not to notice Tristan staring at me. Then he tapped my arm, which I couldn't ignore. "Sure you're okay?" he asked. "Of course." I gave what I hoped was a convincing smile, and I sat back in my seat like I did this every day. No big deal. Chapter 22. Later that week, I stopped at the bank across the street from school. I'd gone with my mom or dad enough times to know what to do. My parents always showed a driver's license, which of course I didn't have, so I brought a copy of my birth certificate from mom's desk. I'd get my money from my account and then go back to some of those prepaid credit cards I'd seen on the racks at Walgreens. I'd never paid much attention to them before, so I didn't know what amounts they went up to. I'd buy however many I needed until they added up to enough money for a plane ticket. Instead of my usual outfit of jeans and whatever clean t-shirt I grabbed, I wore my black pants and a white shirt with buttons. I strode into the bank like it was totally normal for me to go in alone. At the side counter, I picked up a withdrawal slip and filled it out like I always did when I was with my parents, except I was writing down a much bigger number than I ever had. While I waited my turn in line, I told myself to quit fidgeting. I looked nervous if I played with the corner of the withdrawal slip or fiddled with my necklace. Forcing myself to stand still with my hands at my sides made me look like a mannequin. I took a deep breath and imagined the vibration of Blue 55's song playing against my hands. Finally, the customer ahead of me finished whatever he was doing. I stepped up to the counter and handed the teller my withdrawal slip. I tried to look taller as she looked from the paper to me. She said something to me, and I guessed it was about an ID, so I unfolded my birth certificate and slid it over to her. She said something else I didn't catch, so I picked up the chained-up pen on the counter and motioned for her to write it down. On the back of a bank deposit slip, she wrote, "Are your parents here? One of them has to sign to withdraw money from this kind of account." I forced myself not to cry after I read the note. This was money I'd earned from repair work and selling my radios. I should be able to take it out myself. I smiled like this wasn't a problem at all and wrote, "They're really busy with work and couldn't come. I'll have them sign it and come back later." After reading that, the teller shook her head and said, "No, I mean they have to be here to show an ID and sign their name." I shoved the withdrawal slip and birth certificate into my backpack, then wrote on the note, "Oh, right, I forgot. We'll come back later. Thanks." On my way out, I smiled and waved at her, then signed something that would get me into serious trouble if anybody knew sign language. Now what? The whole point of parting with my radios was to have money to find Blue 55, and I couldn't touch it. Even if I asked my parents to withdraw some money for a radio or some parts, they would never believe I needed that much. When they noticed my missing radios, I told them I wanted to save up to buy more that needed fixing, since I liked repairing them. It was a little true, since I did plan to buy more radios when I had enough money, but right then the whale was more important. I got on my bike outside the bank, but didn't turn toward home. I needed to talk to someone who understood me. Grandma took her time answering the door, then gave me a hug and sat in her rocking chair by the window. For a while, I sat there looking out the window with her, staring at whatever she was staring at. Nothing but trees and a parking lot, as far as I could tell. Even though Grandma wasn't looking at me, I picked up my hands and poured out everything I'd been holding on to. All that I tried to do and failed. I told her about Blue 55, the song I'd created, the trip I'd planned, the radios I'd sold, and the money in the bank I couldn't touch. Maybe it was so easy to let all that out because Grandma wasn't watching anyway, or because she'd understand how I felt. Maybe it was some of both. But she should know that I needed her to see me, that there was a reason I went to her with all of this. If she could just look my way, she could see the pain on my face. I didn't expect her to fix it. She could just tell me she was sorry it happened. I'd feel better just knowing someone understood the disappointment and let me know that I'd be okay. Instead, it was like I wasn't even there. "And you know what else isn't fair?" I added when she kept staring at the window. "You're not the only one who misses Grandpa, but we can't all sit around being sad about him. Mom and Dad have to work, and Tristan and I have to go to school." My hands finally dropped to my lap. I didn't know how to express the ache of getting so close to the whale and then missing him, as if he dove below the surface just as my fingers brushed the skin of his back. Maybe Grandma knew a sign for that kind of pain, but I didn't. It wasn't like the sign for hurt I used for a scraped knee or a headache, and it wasn't the twist at the heart that shows grief. Losing someone I never met wasn't the same as losing Grandpa. The closest thing would be the touch to the heart, like something piercing it, but that could also mean something that's touching or moving in a good way because it's so beautiful. Grandma turned to me and signed, "What part of Alaska?" It took me a moment to realize she'd asked me a question. I didn't think she'd been paying attention at all. "Oh, it's..." I held up a hand to represent the state of Alaska, then pointed at a spot along the southern coast, a little town called Appleton. Not that it mattered anymore. Hopefully she saw enough to understand that I wasn't going. An ache crept into my stomach at the thought of explaining it. The night before, Mom came to my room to talk to me again about Blue 55. We'd avoided the subject since the dinner conversation that went so horribly wrong, and she was hoping to help me feel better. It didn't work. Plus, she corrected me when I signed that I missed the whale, which annoyed me even more. I'd signed it with a touch of the chin, the miss sign for when someone you care about is gone. It didn't feel like the wrong sign, even though I'd never met Blue 55. I did miss him. Mom showed me that the sign for miss I'd meant was the one with an open hand closing into a fist in front of the face, kind of like you trying to catch a fly. The sign for something you tried to catch and couldn't, like when Blue 55 slipped away from Andy before she could tag him. Yes, I was going to miss out on seeing Blue 55, but that wasn't what I meant. The miss sign I'd used was also the sign for disappointed, and I'd never understood why. Now it made sense. The meanings weren't so far apart. Someone you wanted to be with is far away, or something you wish for isn't going to come true. I know where that is, Grandma signed, pulling me back to our conversation. What, Appleton? How? Some cruise ship stopped there. I remember from when Grandpa and I were planning one. Grandma and Grandpa went on cruises sometimes, but I couldn't remember one to Alaska. When did you go? We were thinking about it for our anniversary next year. I hadn't known they were planning an anniversary cruise. They had almost made it 50 years. Grandpa always wanted to touch a glacier, Grandpa always wanted to touch a glacier. Grandma didn't turn back to the window, but kept looking right at me. She hadn't done that for a long time. I didn't know what to say to her. Grandpa always wanted to touch a glacier. Grandma didn't turn back to the window, but kept looking right at me. She hadn't done that for a long time. I didn't know what to say to her about the cruise. I'd bring it up to Mom, not because it would change her mind about going to Alaska soon. She'd made it clear that was ridiculous. But I tried to convince her that we had to go someday. Not someday, as in some imaginary time that would never come, but for real. I'd get to tour the sanctuary. Blue 55 wouldn't be there, but I'd see the place where he'd heard my song, and we'd find a glacier to touch for Grandpa. Let's go, Grandma signed. At first I thought she was thinking the same thing I was, that we could talk to my parents about planning a family trip. But Grandma didn't add someday. Her chair wasn't rocking anymore. She leaned toward me, hands on the armrests of the chair. You mean? I couldn't finish the sentence, too afraid to hope for what she was suggesting, even if I understood her correctly. I didn't see how it would work. Mom had already said we weren't going. It looked like Grandma had a different idea swirling in her head, though. So what do you think? She asked. I shook my head and laughed, still not believing it. Like Andy said, Alaska is really far away and people need time to plan for a trip like that. But Grandma was one of those people who jumped into things like she did that day on the beach with the sea whale. She didn't look away, and she didn't look like she was kidding. Maybe I wouldn't have to miss out on meeting Blue 55. It would be just for a short time, a glimpse of him after such a long trip, and I'd have that to hold on to, and then I wouldn't miss him so much. I squeezed Grandma's hand, then answered, I think it's time to get to sea.